Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi!
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Roger Stone this evening, but Roger Stone is on the phone with us right now. And Roger, I don't know if you had a chance to hear the last couple of segments where I just talked about how the core of this country and what makes it successful is when we have effective law and order. And the man you're a great expert on, Richard Nixon, I played his soundbite from the 1968 Republican National Convention where he made law and order a major hallmark of his campaign. It was panned by the academic left and by the left-wing news media as some kind of pandering to racism. But of course, as you know, Roger, the biggest victims of crime in America are black people and other minorities. And he understood that very well. And he also, I think, would have understood what's going on now, Roger, is that our problems in this country, in my opinion, can all be traced back to lax law and order. Today's big news, these hearings on Capitol Hill with these Soros prosecutors letting people out, not prosecuting illegal aliens. You got J.D. Vance in Maine detailing fraud after fraud after fraud, bankrupting this country. We have a congresswoman violating the Logan Act and Jayapal going over to Cuba or working with the Cubans to try to undermine American policy. It goes on and on and on. Law and order isn't racist, Roger, and Richard Nixon understood that, and he got the ball rolling. It took 30 years, but by the mid-'90s, the ball he started rolling had really created a great situation in this country with the less crime.
Well, Jake, as you know, I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. I'm here to conduct final interviews for my upcoming book on the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. But what's striking is how different the city is today than it was when I lived here. First of all, it's much cleaner, but more importantly, it's much safer. That's because President Donald Trump has empowered the National Guard to clean up Washington, D.C. This is now, we have some of the lowest crime rates in the city's history. Even the mayor of D.C., who, let's face it, is no friend of Donald Trump's, has praised this effort. So what you say is absolutely true. But the most important thing I guess I want to talk about right here on the Stone Zone, I appreciate your sitting in for me, Jake, as I finish this book, is as I predicted last night, President Donald Trump has had some key agreements, key breakthroughs in his trip to China. The Chinese have now essentially agreed not to send any weapons to Iran and committed to helping us end the conflict, with the president, Xi Jinping, actually reporting to say that he would give Trump whatever he needs to achieve a peaceful solution. Now, China, as you know, is Iran's largest oil customer, purchasing about 90% of its exports, holding significant leverage, which the United States has now seized through the leadership of Donald Trump. So you've got economic and strategic outcomes of the Trump-Xi meetings. First of all, the Chinese have pledged to end the flow of deadly fentanyl precursors in the United States. There's also a new shift in Chinese energy imports towards taking American oil and natural gas, reducing independence on the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Also increased Chinese purchases of agricultural goods, pork, beef, soybeans, and they've agreed to buy 200 Boeing military jets. Beyond that, you have mutual agreement that Iran cannot possess nuclear weapons or militarize the Strait of Hormuz. So Trump has accomplished an enormous amount in this brief trip, which you and I talked about only last night.
Yeah. Now, with Ronald Reagan, and when we had successful summits back with when Ronald Reagan was president, of course, he coined that term, trust but verify. What's your feeling about how we go forward, to make sure that China lives up to some of these comments that they've made? My thought is that, well, they'll probably cause problems elsewhere, and that's not the fault of President Trump or other factors. But what's your feeling on the solidness of their promises. I don't doubt President Trump's promises here, whatever he's promised to China. But on their end, what's the leverage? We have oil leverage, right? And we also have we could completely wreck Iran's oil supply, couldn't we?
No, that's exactly right. I was just talking to my grandson, who I said, I don't trust the Chinese, who often do one thing and say something else. But at the same time, between cutting off their oil from Venezuela, where they were getting 90% of that output, and cutting off their oil now from Iran, they have no access to cheap oil. This very significantly reduces the threat. And Trump brought, as you know, a plane load of leading business men and women from this country, and they've agreed to open their markets to us. So we will be able to tell pretty easily whether they're living up to it. The one place I trust them the least, and where I think they are doing the most damage to the country, is in the drug trade. They cannot pretend that they are not the major importer of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors that go to Mexico and, let's face it, cross our southern border.
Roger Stone, and I think let's continue to talk about this fentanyl thing and the drug trade in China, because I think that there's a lot of Americans who still think about Miami Vice times with the drug, big drug kingpins, big money, financial reasons, things like that. But this is, when it comes to China and what they're exporting in this country, they're not looking for customers. They're looking for casualties. I mean, that's really what it is, isn't it?
No, they've done enormous damage to the United States. The one place we don't seem to have any agreement is on Taiwan. They continue to say that it's not negotiable. On the other hand, I don't think they have the military strength today to move on Taiwan, but they also recognize that in Donald Trump, they don't have a patsy like Joe Biden. If the Chinese had moved on Taiwan while Joe Biden was president, he would have no doubt sent a strong letter of objection. Donald Trump would send ICBM missiles, and they know it, which is why they will not move on our ally Taiwan, and why I think they really need to think twice about the drug trade, because Trump will crack down on them if they don't keep their word in these bilateral agreements.
Roger, how much confidence do you have in some of these American tech companies, whether it's NVIDIA or in some cases an Apple, and some of these other chip companies, to keep the kinds of technology that has been developed here and is very sensitive and has national security implications? My thought is, we got to let business continue to flow. We want business to succeed here in America, and China's an important customer. But I'm feeling like an owner of a big retail store where, they always factor in, 3% or something, 4% for theft, for shoplifting, something like that. Maybe it's a larger number. I wonder if that's what's going on here. I expect there to be some theft of our technology. I hope we can keep a cap on it, but I don't think that we're gonna come out of this unscathed. I don't.
Look, I don't trust these companies at all. It's very nice to be back on X, formerly known as Twitter, where I'm Roger J. Stone Jr., Roger J. Stone Jr. But to this day, the Meta company will not let me back on Facebook or Instagram. I continue to be censored on YouTube, for example. So, things are not really better. Censorship in America continues to be a huge problem. And even when you're not censored, candidly, they shadow ban you. They use algorithms to limit your reach. I don't trust any of these companies. When I see Tim Cook and these other guys at the White House kissing Trump's derriere, I don't trust those guys at all. I know Google is manipulating both in their searches and in Gmail political messaging. I'll give you an example. If you're a Democrat, you will get 8 emails on Google, on Gmail, reminding you to vote. If you're a Republican, you won't get a single one. Or if you're unregistered, they will read your searches, see whether you lean left or whether you lean right. If you lean left, you'll get multiple reminders to register to vote. That's just one example of the way these big tech companies play games. Meanwhile, they're donating to the building of the White House ballroom, and while we appreciate their check, I trust them not at all.
How did we get to this place with these large tech companies? One of the things I think Americans are really naive about is they think, well, it's now because of the technology that, we're losing our privacy, or these these people in the bureaucracy and things like that are spying on us. They never really wanted to before. I think it's the other way around, Roger. I think that the powers that be in the world since the time of the cavemen wanted to control the public, but they never had the tools with which to do it. But with everyone in the world walking around with the smartphone that can listen to us and monitor us, let alone record what we type into it, suddenly the Chinese model of full surveillance, full censorship, full repression is possible, even in the so-called free world. And I think that that's really incredibly enticing for statists, communists, leftists of all kinds. How do we push back on that without just throwing all of our phones away?
Well, first of all, I think you have to look at the plus and the minus. Without the internet and without social media, Donald Trump could never have been elected president. The rise of social media and the rise of the internet broke the monopoly of big media: ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. And Jake, as I often say, I don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't drink out of the toilet. So these companies didn't realize that when they essentially leveled the playing field and provided a platform for Donald Trump to counterpunch against the caricature of him that they tried to paint in the 2016 election, now they're trying to shove the toothpaste back in the tube, but I don't think it will work. On the other hand, I just operate, having been through a bad experience, shall we say, I operate in the assumption that all my emails, all my text messages, all my phone calls are being monitored by someone. Before the 2024 election, the FBI contacted my personal attorney to tell me that my cell phone and my email had been compromised. And when my lawyer said compromised by whom, they said, well, by the Iranians. Now, I'm not sure I believe that. I think that my email, my text messages, my phone calls may have been compromised, but how do I know it's not the FBI themselves? Remember, Joe Biden was president at the time. So you point out a very real danger. I think you have to operate on the assumption that anything you say, anything you write could appear tomorrow morning on the front page of the New York Times. So govern yourself accordingly.
Your scenario that you're talking about, although this isn't what happened to you, but it very much reminds me of 2018 and that whole Jeff Bezos incident, if you remember. The nude pictures of him, which, as anyone could tell you, including the brother of Lorena Sanchez, who is now married to Jeff Bezos, was something that Lorena herself put out there. She was trying to get Jeff's marriage ended, and I guess he was on the fence. But Bezos had the gall, and he got Gavin DeBecker, a security expert, or at least a theoretical security expert, to go to the UN of all places, not to mention other places, and claim that he was hacked by the Saudis. And by the way, every phone hacker I knew who I interviewed about that story told me this is not the way you hack a phone. The point being that you can't expect privacy, whether it's tech or not, in the case, or someone who wants to, someone close to you who might want to compromise you. But the fact is, it does make everything more heightened. Before the age of smartphones, this would have been some pictures sent maybe in the mail or something like that, and it would have been much less of a situation. Everything's on steroids, and I got to say, it certainly gives power to these social media companies. Roger, can you stay with us for a few minutes after this break to talk about? I want to talk about Nixon with you one more time, because I like talking about him with you.
Absolutely, I'll be right here.
All right, fantastic. We're going to take a break. I'll be back with Roger Stone. I'm Jake Novak. This is the Stone Zone. I'm Jake Novak, and I have Roger Stone on the phone for a few more minutes before the end of the hour. And Roger, I played a soundbite of then-candidate Richard Nixon running for president in 1968 at the Republican National Convention, his acceptance speech, where I think he surprised a lot of people by making law and order the cornerstone of his message that evening, and he carried it through the campaign, and it was very successful. But you are probably the best person to talk about this with. It wasn't a harsh law and order that Nixon imposed once he was elected. He was not looking to bring martial law into this country. For one thing, he knew that the drug problem in this country couldn't just be solved by throwing everyone in jail. He started that process of creating clinics for people to get off of heroin, for example, and that was very successful. He also went to some of these protests, some of them illegal, and spoke very famously. I think it was either the Lincoln or the Jefferson Memorial in the middle of the night, spoke to some of the anti-Vietnam War protesters. I mean, it doesn't have to be harsh. Law and order is not about being harsh and hitting people over the head. It's about protecting the greater public. I think Nixon understood that, and he wasn't given his due for that.
Well, I think you had a unique circumstance in which Richard Nixon, who had lost the 1960 election by a whisker, I've written 2 books on it, I believe was stolen from him, then tried to run for governor of California, was defeated. But then you had a unique circumstance in which the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, the Vietnam War, which was really dividing America, and the fact that our cities had become unsafe and many of them were burning, really parted the seas in a way in which Richard Nixon made what was, until Donald Trump, the greatest single comeback in American history. Now, it is true that I have a tattoo of Richard Nixon, a portrait of him, on my back, about the size of a grapefruit, between my shoulder blades. And in a way, Jake, it's not a political statement. What it is a daily reminder that in life, when things don't go your way, when you're defeated, when you get knocked down, when you reach for something and you fall short, that's the time to get up off the canvas, dust yourself off, and get back in the fight. See, the story of Nixon is a story of resilience. It's a story of persistence. It's a story of indestructibility, and it's a purely American story. That's why 4 American presidents were there at Nixon's funeral to pay homage to him, and why he made his greatest comeback at the end of his life as an advisor to President Bill Clinton, telling him how to handle the Chinese and the Russians. So I think you're absolutely right about the fact that he recognized earlier than most that America had a crime crisis. But as you point out, he's also the president who desegregated the public schools. He's also the president who appointed more African Americans to federal office than Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy combined. He is also the president who quadrupled the financing for civil rights law enforcement. He's also the president who tripled the spending on black colleges. So he's also the president who gave us affirmative action, which many of my conservative friends are not very happy about, but still remains part of his overall civil rights record. So when they talk about the Southern strategy, what exactly are they talking about? The fact that he did more for civil rights than any president since Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah, it makes the point. It's one of the things that really bothers me, this continued belief in red states and blue states. You have to be a candidate like Nixon and accept the fact that, or go after the fact that there's no such thing. You have to campaign. He was mimicked he was mocked in 1960 for visiting one of the 50 states. Everyone, that's a waste of your time. No, it's not. Not if you really believe you have a message for this entire country. I would really like to see that happen again in this country. Somebody do that. And in 1968, maybe he didn't visit all 50 states like he did in 1960, but he did make it clear that he wasn't giving up on any states. And his election flipped that script in the South. All of a sudden now, there were Democrats in the South then who had to run on something other than being pro-segregation. It changed things overnight. And I think Donald Trump's done that too. And that's why there's been so much resistance against him by some of these Republicans. We got a minute left, Roger.
I think you're absolutely right. What people don't realize is many people say that had Robert Kennedy lived and Nixon had a face-off with him, Nixon would have lost. Actually, that's not true. John F. Kennedy carried every deep southern state. Robert Kennedy could not have carried Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and so on. So it was an extraordinary breakthrough, and it was a massive political realignment. The coalition that elected Nixon in 1972, elected Reagan in 1980, is the same coalition that elected Donald Trump in 2016. Jake, thanks for having me. It's been great to be in the Stone Zone.
Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow.